Another day, another Hollywood remake. This time, Jake Gyllenhaal stars in an updated version of Presumed Innocent. The original was a 90s legal thriller starring Harrison Ford. Today on the podcast, we get into the series and why reboots continue to dominate. I'm Amil Niazi, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Now, you know it's a big trend in Hollywood right now. If it was a hit back in the 80s or 90s, chances are it's gonna get a reboot. And this time, it's a remake of Presumed Innocent. Jake Gyllenhaal plays the character that Harrison Ford sort of made famous back in the 90s. He's a prosecutor who is definitely not presumed innocent.
I did not kill her. You really think that I killed Karen?
It's a question everyone's asking.
I am not a liar.
Well, you are.
I lied about the affair, but I didn't kill her.
Your DNA was found at the scene.
They could put you away forever.
Is there something else? I did not kill her. Sick! They have no case, so they're trying to free me.
Nobody is above the law.
I didn't kill her.
Well, we'll see about that, Jake Gyllenhaal. He doesn't play a very nice man, that's for sure. But you get the gist. The first two episodes of Presumed Innocent just dropped on Apple TV+. The series was adapted for television by David E. Kelley, who has been making courtroom dramas for decades. Leila Latif has been watching, and she is here now to tell us what she thinks of this new remake and how it stacks up with other legal thrillers. Hi, Leila. How are you?
I'm excited to be here.
Excited to chat about this. I was like, I'm hooked. Immediately, I was hooked. So give us a very quick recap of sort of what's happening in this story.
So we've got a prosecutor who's played by Jake Gyllenhaal. He has got a wife that he does not deserve, played by Ruth
Exactly,
Negga.
yes.
And he has had an affair. He has had an affair with a character, with a kind of colleague played by Renata Renzibi. We're probably mispronouncing that, but who's best known for being in Worst Person in the World. Mm-hmm. She turns up dead, but kind of in the style of a person that they previously put into prison. So it's like there's a question of like, did they get the wrong man? And then he becomes like the number one suspect.
Yeah, it's sort of like The Fugitive meets, like a saucy sort of 90s like erotic thriller. Now, I mentioned that Harrison Ford played the original Rusty. How do they stack up against each other if you had to choose? Do you prefer the Jake Gyllenhaal version or the Harrison Ford one?
I actually prefer the Jake Gyllenhaal version, but I think it's because like modern lens perspective, like if you go back to that early version, like everybody who's like in charge and working the legal system seems like very competent, very noble, knows what they're doing. Like the fact that like an innocent man went to prison, like, oh my goodness, what an abomination. And like in this one, it's more just kind of like people are corrupt and messy and stuff. So this kind of more adds up with my understanding of how like people, how the legal system actually works. And yeah, like I like Jake Gyllenhaal's sort of like fidgety, seems slightly incompetent sort of vibe.
I like him too, but I have to admit that I just can't unsee Donnie Darko. Like no matter what role he's playing, I just see him as a strange teenager. And I was struggling to see him as like a dad of teens.
It is true. I mean, even like when you say like, when they're like the original was 34 years ago, it's just like, no, surely that amount of time has not passed. Surely like that can't be true. Jake Gyllenhaal can't be middle-aged. Like what's happened to us all? But
exactly.
Like
the 90s were 10 years ago. Everyone knows that.
Of course they were. But it's like, yeah, no, I did like appreciate it though, because I felt like when I was watching it, I was just like, this is the ultimate dad show. I've got to recommend this to my dad. And then I had a moment of just like, am I the dad now? Because this is appealing to me.
Am I the dad now is my lens for a lot of the shows I like, genuinely. You mentioned his wife, the character played by Ruth Negga. And, the show really allows room to delve into their dynamic in that marriage. And I like how complicated it is. Like, yes, he's had an affair, but he is still remaining committed, in air quotes, committed to his family and his children. What do you think about the dynamic that's happening there?
I think it was really smart casting because like Ruth Negga, I've adored her for years, but she's always got this sense of somebody that's like got more information than anybody else in the room. Like she
Yes.
always seems like the smartest person in any room, no matter what character she's playing. So like, even though her kind of husband is like stepping out and having these affairs and stuff, you've got the sense that she is like well aware of the situation and is making choices for reasons that like may reveal themselves later. Like she doesn't feel like a victim.
No, I completely agree with that. But speaking of the victim, for a show like this to really work, to take it beyond, your classic sort of 2-hour thriller film, you have to care about the person at the center of this, who is played by, as you mentioned, Renata Reinsve. How does that unfold here? Do you think that, we are hooked into Caroline's story as much as we sort of need to be? Are we invested in who she is?
I mean, she's an incredible actress. She's so charming and wonderful, and she brings like a lot of warmth to it. But there seem to be like a little bit of like the relics of the 90s that she kind of can't move past, in that like I feel sometimes that like the show is just like punishing her a bit because like she's, she's sort of not got custody of her child anymore. She's like a working woman. She's sort of, a bit more sexually liberated and stuff. So maybe it's like, it does feel a little icky at times where it's just like, burn the witch. But
Yes, yeah.
she elevates the material, but the material is still the material.
Yeah, I want to quickly mention that one of the big criticisms of that film in the 90s was that this character, seemed to be crucified for being an ambitious woman, for choosing her career over her family life and her children, and that she almost deserved to be punished in this way. So you're sort of saying it's a little bit better than that, but not quite, at least not yet.
No, not yet. I mean, there could have been some like tweaks that they could have made, but I guess maybe that would have like unraveled the show too much away from the source material. So I understand why they did it this way, but I don't know. Like I love an erotic thriller, but they're problematic at times.
Yes, understatement of the century. The reviews of this have been good, and like I said, I was hooked pretty much immediately from the jump. But it's not like anyone was asking for a remake of Presumed Innocent, a film from the 90s. Why do you think this particular one was rebooted?
I think what you see with like people when they get like a bit of power, I think in Hollywood, and they can kind of launch projects based off their stardom, is they kind of want to make the movies that they thought they were awesome, that were awesome when they were like going and renting a video from like the local blockbuster. I think that's the basis of basically all of Glenn Powell's career at the moment. And I think like, yeah, I think this is just a case of like Jake Gyllenhaal like remembering when he got to see Harrison Ford be awesome and being like, yeah, I'd like to do that. Like it's nostalgia, but it's like, it's quite sweet nostalgia.
Well, speaking of Jake and his attraction to these reboots, he just starred in a remake of Patrick Swayze's Roadhouse. What do you think is attracting him in particular to adapting some of these, I don't want to call them iconic roles, but certainly roles of the past?
Well, I guess it's like that mid-budget sort of movie that existed back then, like that Roadhouse or like Presumed Innocent, like that doesn't get to happen as much anymore. And like streaming, everything becomes about like tentpole movies where you've got to be a superhero or like doing like little indie projects. And like these streaming platforms do seem to have like a bit of an opportunity to explore the sort of roles that like probably don't come up very often for him. But I mean, the Roadhouse remake was terrible. This is an improvement, but I'm kind of happy to bring this stuff back. Like, bring back the erotic thrillers, bring back the courtroom dramas, bring back the the rom-coms. Like, if that's what Apple is going to be doing, I'm all for it.
Same, to be honest. Well, let's talk about the courtroom drama side, because the man behind this is, probably one of the best known for this type of stuff. We're talking about David E. Kelley. He did The Lincoln Lawyer, Boston Legal, Ally McBeal. Love that show. Let's get a remake of Ally McBeal. Anatomy of a Scandal. So how does this stack up kind of with the rest of his oeuvre?
I think this is a little bit darker than the rest of his oeuvre. That seemed to, a lot of those were very like kind of like justice is served, and this is a little bit murkier because we're kind of getting into like that people are putting their ambition and wanting to get ahead within like within the legal field a little bit more than they care whether or not people are guilty or innocent. So yeah, I think it's going into murkier waters, but in a way that I actually really like. Having said that, bring back Ally McBeal, yeah, from your mouth to God's ears.
Right? Why aren't there more dancing babies on television is a question I've been asking for 10 years, since the 90s. So is it a thumbs up for you? Because, I think Apple has a little bit of trouble getting, enough buzz for a lot. Like, they have tons of dad shows on there. Some of them are really, really good. Do you think this can rise above, what's happening on that platform?
I hope so, because it's the kind of grown-up show that I would like to see more of. But yeah, I mean, like, stuff does just disappear on Apple. I mean, there was this show not that long ago that it seemed nobody was talking about, and it was like Steven Spielberg, biggest budget of all time, Austin Butler, and it was like nobody even registered. But then you see something like Severance that does like brilliantly, because their release model with like a couple of episodes at the beginning and then one a week means you can kind of build up a bit of buzz. So I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic.
You're optimistic.
Despite all the evidence.
But you like this show. It's hitting for you.
I do. Yeah, it just feels like the sort of thing that we don't get anymore. And like, I guess I'm a bit like Jake Gyllenhaal, that I remember going to like the video shop and renting movies and, seeing this sort of thing and really wanting, and now I really want more of it.
Okay, I want to ask you one last question before I let you go. If you could remake anything, if you had a magic wand to bring back, an erotic thriller, a rom-com, something that needs an update, what are you bringing back?
I would really like to see a remake of I think, because there was a remake, but it was terrible, but I want to see it done right. I really want to see a remake of Carrie. I love early Brian De Palma so much. And then they remade it wrong. And like, I would love to see it with the proper kind of like horrors of teenage girlhood explored with an actress as good as Sissy Spacek, but like that kind of introduced like the modern horrors of being a teenage girl. Like, I think that, that some of the themes of Carrie are still so relevant, but like there is like, I think it's only gotten harder to be a teenage girl. And I just think like it'd be so ripe for exploration.
I love that. Leila, thank you so much for being here today.
Pleasure.
Leila Latif is a critic for Total Film, The Guardian, and other publications in London, England. Presumed Innocent is streaming now on Apple TV+. I'm Amil Niazi, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Okay, it seems like every week there's a new addition to the Star Wars universe. It's hard for me to keep up with all of them, but apparently critics are really liking this latest one called The Acolyte. It follows twins Osha and May, both played by Amandla Stenberg, and also stars Squid Game actor Jung-Jae. He is actually Star Wars' first Asian Jedi in a lead role. Laura Sirikul is here to talk about The Acolyte, to make sense of this gigantic Star Wars universe for me. Thank you so much for being here, Laura.
No, thank you. Hi.
I actually want to start by playing a moment from the most recent episode that kind of sets the scene for what we're talking about here. Take a listen.
They take you, I will stop them. No one's taking me. The Jedi are bad. The Jedi are good.
This isn't about good or bad. This is about power and who is allowed to use it.
So, Laura, one of our producers, Jane, was trying to contextualize where this falls into the universe. And I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But apparently this takes place before The Phantom Menace. So can you situate where The Acolyte falls into this multi-layered universe?
Yeah, so everything we know about the Skywalkers and Mandalorians and, that history that we see on camera, Andor, everything takes place 100 years before the very first Phantom Menace, whenever we first meet Anakin Skywalker. So we're entering new territory of history that isn't really shown in the television or film mediums. There are books, the High Republic, that talk about it, but this is the first time that we're seeing it take place in this form of medium. Taking a look at the Jedi, like for the first time, fully really looking at the the Jedi power when they're in power and the institution that they built. So it's a really new territory and refreshing take on who the Jedi are before, all the commotion of like the Skywalker saga. Um, yeah.
Now, one thing I thought that was interesting about the way they're telling this story is that we're so used to thinking of the Jedi as, the saviors, the heroes of the story. But what this, chapter is trying to do is contextualize when they had power and how maybe their history is a bit more complicated than just the total good guys.
No, 100%. It takes a really good critical look at the Jedi because obviously, whenever an institution is in power, and especially if it's strict and very stringent, like the Jedi, who are very stuck in their ways and the rules, there's going to be people who are oppressed. And it takes a look at like the Jedi. Everyone has had this idea of like the Jedi are good, like no matter what. Like growing up, it's like I want to be the good guys, the Jedi. But this series takes on the gray area of the Jedi, what it takes to stay in power, who is being oppressed, and it gives us a different insight. Like, was the Jedi good? Did they have to do something a little bit shady in the gray area to get there to where they are in power? And then, it kind of made me think like, who are these people who are oppressed? Did it create the Sith? Did it create this powerful being that wanted to be against the Jedi that we thought were bad, but maybe there's a gray area to it?
Yeah, it's super interesting. I've always heard Star Wars compared to some of the classic Westerns, and certainly George Lucas says he was inspired by those as well. It's been called a space Western, but he has also said he's been heavily inspired by East Asia as a major influence. And we're finally starting to see a little bit of that pop up in this. And he's been widely criticized for not featuring more Asian actors in this series, given some of his, influences that he's drawing on. How do you think that this works in that context?
What's beautiful about this is Acolyte showrunner is following kind of George Lucas's vision. Leslie Headland is kind of following his vision of being inspired by East Asia, wuxia films, and because George Lucas was really a huge Akira Kurosawa fan, and he actually wanted Toshiro Mifune to be Obi-Wan Kenobi at first, who he rejected it because he thought it was too niche. But but Leslie really focused on a lot of the East Asian aspects of the Jedi and the culture of that culture. So having Jung-Jae be actually it's really sad, the first Asian Jedi, the main character that we see in all of Star Wars history, to kind of like showcase that the influence that Star Wars and the Jedi, there's a history of Asian culture to that. So it's beautiful to see Jung-Jae be cast and to have and then Manny Jacinto be cast, and it's great to see more Asian faces inspired by a series and films that's inspired by Asian culture.
And how do you think they do right by this character played by Jung-Jae? He's a Jedi Master called Soul. Is he everything that we've been waiting for in terms of finally having an Asian lead play a Jedi?
Oh my God, he's perfect, actually. Like I think it's not just because it's Jung-Jae and he's just an incredible actor of his history and career, but he breaks the stereotypes of what typically Asians and Jedis are on screen. We always see these strict, follow the rules. They are very they have no emotions. Like it's funny because people would compare Jedi, if you look at the Star Wars, like a Star Trek universe, to Vulcans, because they suppress their emotions. And with Jung-Jae's Master of Soul, he has levity, he has kindness, he cares, and there's a charismatic like tone to his like behavior and the way he approaches things, which is very away from what we typically see of Asians, like Asian men who are in power. They're usually like the strict ones. So what the series does right is giving this Asian like this Asian character, the first Asian Jedi, and giving him some like personality that's beyond the Jedi and beyond what the Asian stereotypes have been given to us in the past regarding that medium. And so it's such a refreshing spin that you introduce us to the first Asian Jedi, and he is filled with kindness and like gentle. He's a gentle master, and so it's just not only refreshing as to watch as a Star Wars fan, but just as a person watching and knowing the history of Asians in Western media.
It sounds amazing. So very quickly, Laura, Star Wars often falls into a trap of, paying dues to the fans and sort of leaving the story behind. Do you think this show falls into that same trap?
No. Oh my God, it's so refreshing because there's really not a lot of history to do Easter eggs, because it's so set way in the past, way before Anakin was even born or Anakin's family was around, and so it has room to breathe. It has room to create its own folklore and mythology, and fan service is great and all, but it can overtake a series like
Yeah.
Ahsoka and Andor. There's always Easter eggs, but that's because it's based on a story that's already continuous. But with this one, what's great is that they do have Easter eggs from like Star Wars history books or canon books, but it allows us to see something, a fresh take on the Jedi, and it can create its own lore.
A fresh take on the Jedi. That sounds
Yeah,
great, Laura.
it's such a fresh take. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being here and talking us through this new chapter in the Star Wars universe.
Thank you.
Laura Sirikul is a freelance writer based in LA. You can watch the first 3 episodes of The Acolyte on Disney Plus now.